we have Mr. Coby Randquist on stage.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Like you said, I do organize a couple conferences, so the in-between time is the time I'm used to getting up here and talking, doing more of the introductions and not so much the presentations. This is actually my second non-lightning talk presentation at a Ruby conference. So I guess we'll start here, if I can figure out the clicker. I wanted to thank the organizers for inviting me. Like I said, I operate behind the scenes a whole lot more than I do up here on stage. So I appreciated the invitation to come out. Prakash had mentioned that the community here in India had benefited particularly from the accessibility that Confreaks has been able to make available to all the various conferences around mostly the United States. A large part of that is due in part to Chad Fowler's support. When we first started Confreaks and approached him in 2007 about recording the events, he was open to it and actually worked with Microsoft to get sponsorship. Microsoft was the primary video sponsor in 2007 and helped make this whole thing happen. Let me jump back to my slides for a minute. So who am I? My name is Coby Randquist. I've been doing software development and managing teams and building teams for about 25 years or so now. I started off back working with BASIC and Business Basic in a language called Thoroughbred Basic on Unix. Originally writing software to run construction companies. I've been migrated to Visual Basic, did a lot of work with Microsoft tools. I was a Microsoft guy for a good 16, 17 years. Migrated to C#, and then I discovered Ruby. One of the other things is I like doing community building. I like getting groups of people like this together and finding the things that you care about and then finding ways to make it more realistic for you to be able to pursue those passions. I do that with Ruby. In the last year and a half, I've started getting involved with the Openstack community. If you're not familiar with Openstack, it is a platform for building cloud computing. Meetups, user groups. I'm very excited. This is the first regional conference in India. It's been, at first when I got involved with the Ruby community, it's like, oh, this is really neat. We've got these regional conferences. All communities should have this. And they don't. If you look at Python, Python has PyCon, which is their big national conference, or their big conference, but there's not a Python conference every time you turn around. There's a Ruby conference just about every weekend. Somewhere in the world, there's a Ruby conference going on. Let's see. Oh, so you'll notice the picture of the truck. One of my other passions is rock crawling. That's just a really beefed up truck that you go out and you go really slow over really nasty obstacles. Another community. So in this talk, if you looked at the abstract, it says nothing because I didn't actually provide one to your organizers. So what I wanted to kind of do is go back and talk a little bit about my beginnings in the Ruby community, how Confreaks got started, and then a little bit about the different conferences that I do, and then we'll spend a couple minutes just on the topic of open source software and why we do or why we should care about this and how we can help spread really the passion for what we do. Because, well, and I will get to that part a few slides down the road. So how did I get started? Like I said, I was working in a Microsoft shop. I worked for a company called vehix.com. We did consumer automotive research. It was a .NET shop, and I'd found Ruby. I don't honestly remember why I found it, but I looked at it, played around with it, really liked it, but decided there was no way I was going to be able to convince our management to make the talent switch. And there's no way I was going to be able to convince all the people on the team that we should be changing because we had just gone through a switch from Microsoft Visual Basic to the .NET framework in C#. So we'd just gone through that. There was no way we were getting another switch through management. So I kind of put Ruby away. And then about 6 or 8 months later, I got to the point where I wanted to teach my kids a little bit more about programming. And if you open up a Windows machine today, I was still using Windows full-time at that point. If you open up a Windows machine today, it doesn't come with a programming language. Or if it does, it's very buried. When I got into computers, I started out on a Commodore 64 or a VIC-20. The basic language was there. In fact, that was your interface to the computer. You didn't have an operating system. You booted right into the language, which provided everything. So lacking that, I went looking for a language. I found Ruby. I found Chris Pine's book, Learn to Program. And you can't really tell from the photo there, but the computer there is actually a Sun SPARCstation 10, because I have a lot of kids. I've got 6 girls. Now they range from, my youngest set of twins are 17. My oldest set of twins just turned 21, and my oldest daughter's 23, and there's one in the middle. So I wanted a way to teach them, so I actually built a little lab, and the cheapest way to do it at the time was I picked up a bunch of used SPARCstations, got them running Linux, got Ruby installed on it, and sat down and away we went. Ultimately, it got me involved with Ruby. None of my kids really got into software development, but can't win all the battles. All right, so that was in early 2006 where I was trying to teach my kids how to do Ruby. And about that time, I started to evaluate what I was doing with my professional life and at vhx.com, and it really kind of got to the point where I wanted to try to do Ruby. I wanted to figure out how I could utilize it. So at that point, my options, in 2006, I basically decided to quit my job, open up a consulting shop, and build software solutions for people who didn't care about the technology I implemented it in, which gave me the ability to code in Ruby and in Rails without having to justify the technology choices I was making. I just had to provide a solution. So after doing that, I'd been on my own for about 2 months or so and heard about Rubyconf through the local users group in Utah at the time. So heard about Rubyconf. I was in Salt Lake City, Utah. Denver is literally a jump over the mountain. So you hop on a plane, 45 minutes, you're there. So I went to Rubyconf in 2006. And Chad presented, and all these guys are presenting, and they're just blowing my mind. And at the end, I think the format was a little bit different, because I think Matt's actually did his keynote at like the end of one of the days. So he did his keynote speech, but he went through 400 slides and talked about a topic. One of the topics was bike shedding. But he went through so many slides, and I was already so brain fried at that point from all this new material that I wanted to go back and watch it again. And it wasn't an option. I think there was somebody who had their Mac Pro turned around and aimed at the stage, so there were bits and pieces of the talk available. But there wasn't a whole lot available. So that kind of set the seed for Confreaks. So we went home from the conference, started talking about it a little bit. I don't know if you know, there's a guy named Mike Moore. He runs the Mountain West Ruby Conference in Salt Lake City. So he actually had a number of co-organizers the first couple of years. In 2007, he felt, I don't know if it was, were there regional conferences before 06? So Mike started to organize Mountain West RubyConf in 2007, and he said, we should record this. And I got together with my partner at the time, a guy named Carl Youngblood, and we figured, Mike was organizing the conference, so the two of us said, all right, we'll go figure out how to record it. So we borrowed some cameras and got a frame grabber and set up, and we recorded the tape, because at the time, cameras weren't where they are today. So we recorded everything to tape, we recorded the event, we did post-production on it. We came up with, we basically said, how hard can this be? After recording to tape and then spending, I think it took us like 60 hours to take the data from tape and get it converted into a digital format to where we could then do post-production on it. And it was horrible, but we got it done. Later that year, we talked with Ruby Hoedown, was another regional conference that happened that year. And they signed up and said, yeah, let's record it. So we started to make that one happen. Carl and I went out and bought all new equipment and basically created Confreaks at that point. So the company, we set up a company, we went out and we bought these cameras and they set up on tripods and we had all this wiring in place and we'd run all the wires to the back of the room and one guy could sit at the back of the room, can remote control 3 cameras and do all the switching. And it was great and it was hard, and in 2007 we recorded Mountain West, we recorded Ruby Hoedown, we recorded Rubyconf, and then through those connections we recorded a conference called SMEDI, which is an agile developer conference that's held every year in Oslo, Norway. So we did our first international conference our first year, and that was an adventure. But the setup that we were using at the time, as you can see on the bottom of the slide there, we used a double-wide format. So we recorded the video and we recorded the slides and then we put them together, and they were in the incredible high definition of 960 pixels wide because both frames were standard definition. So that was the first year. One of the things I learned out of that year, actually this quote came about between my wife and I as we were raising 5 kids under 5. No matter how hard you think it's going to be, and this applies to just about any endeavor, you end up wishing it was that easy. And part of that falls into the open source and the passion and all of the efforts that we undertake, or all of the things that you look at in life. Yes, they're hard, but they're worth it. All right, so 2008, we recorded 7 conferences. I won't go through them individually. The O'Reilly's Tools for Change for Publishers was interesting because it was our first deviation from software development and Ruby conferences. And if you notice, we haven't done a lot of those. There's reasons for that. I like the community and the spirit that we have here. So that was 2008, but so that year was 7. Also in 2008, I'd been doing the independent contractor stuff for about 2 years, and in the United States, at the end of 2007 or the end of 2008, the economy was getting a little wonky, and I had wrapped up a major contract that had been a large part of keeping my business going, and I'd gotten to the stage where I was going around and doing a lot of the work that we were doing at that point was smaller project work and constantly dealing with where's the next check coming from, and started having some checks bounce here and there, and decided that really wasn't where I wanted to go. So I wanted a regular income rather than a feast and famine that you get in the consulting world. So I ended up joining yellowpages.com. Yellow Pages at the time was a wholly owned subsidiary of AT&T. They are no longer owned by AT&T. So that was also a transition in 2008 where I went from running my own company, joined Yellow Pages, moved to Southern California, and started running a development team there. But when I got there, there was no meetup. There was no regional meetup, and that just blew my mind because I came from Salt Lake City, Utah, which has a population probably 1/3 or less of what the LA area has. And yet we had Ruby meetups about every 30 or 40 miles along the major interstate because people didn't want to drive more than 30 or 40 miles, so they just set up their own meetup. So when I got to LA, there wasn't one. So we created a local meetup and got that going. And I'll tell you, the biggest thing about running a meetup and having them work is pick a date, pick a time, and be there. Be there consistently. Whether you have presentations or you just hack, make it a staple that people can count on, and it will grow. Just getting the ability to get people together on a regular basis and something predictable that they can put on their calendars and know that this is going to be there and it's going to be at that time and place. All right, so that takes us into 2009. Our big change in 2009, and this generally came, a lot of the progress that we've had with confreaks.com over the years has actually came from Mountain West Rubyconf, where Mike Moore says, hey, I really liked what you did last year, but let's try this. So we switched to doing high definition slides. So instead of capturing them and scaling the slides from your full resolution output to TV quality output, which is a lot worse, or at least was at the time, we started capturing them at full resolution, and we continued that year in 2009 to capture the speakers with standard definition cameras. Let's see, new conferences that year, Axis Conference. There's not actually too many regional events in this community that have started and then stopped. There's been a couple. Axis Conference happened once. Parallels and Convergences is actually not a Ruby conference. And then we also did a Agile conference that year. In 2010, Mike said, hey, this stuff's really nice, but can't we get high definition cameras now? The other thing that happened at the end of 2009 that had a major impact on Confreaks is in both 2007 and 2008, we recorded the conference SMEDI in Oslo. And Carl, who was my partner in Confreaks, had been talking with a company in Norway, and we met up with him both years we were there. And at the end of 2009, they offered him a job. So Carl moved to Oslo, Norway, at which point I bought him out of Confreaks. So 2010 was my first solo year running Confreaks. And in that year, Mike pushed me, wanted high definition cameras, so I changed from these robotic controlled cameras that we had to something very similar to what we're using today as far as the cameras go. But in 2010, we recorded LA, Mountain West. 2009 was the year I launched the Los Angeles Ruby Conference. I'm going to backrest there for just a second because I launched the LA Ruby Conference for a very specific reason, and I think it's one of the very similar reasons that Prakash has helped launch Garden City Ruby, which was at the time in Los Angeles, I had an engineering team. I actually had 30 or 40 people working in Ruby, and I knew there was no way I would ever get the budget approved to send 30 people over the period of a year traveling to different conferences to get them to have the experience that you all get to have by being here today. And as much as people can benefit from the content that we record at these events, that's half or less of what you get out of a conference. The benefit of attending a conference is not just your relationship, listening to speakers up here broadcasting at you, but it's the value you get out of talking to people next to you. It's the hallway track. It's the time that you spend actually discussing your coding issues, your office issues with other people in similar environments that can help influence your culture. And that's where a lot of the benefit of all this comes from. So I started LA Rubyconf in 2009 because it was the best way to A, get all of my people to have that experience, and B, we were looking for a way to introduce Ruby to more developers because we needed more people who could work in Ruby. And in the LA area, there's a huge amount of software development going on, but a lot of it's .NET, a lot of it was Java. So we needed a way to introduce those people. To this day, almost every year at the Los Angeles Ruby Conference, when I ask how many people get paid to work in Ruby today, only about 60% of the audience gets paid to do Ruby. The other 40% are there to learn about Ruby. All right, so 2010, I just got through talking about changes with Los Angeles, and now I'm leaving. So in the end of 2010, I decided that it was time for a change. Yellow Pages was a fantastic company and a really great opportunity for me, and working for AT&T was an interesting set of dynamics, but I wanted to move someplace where my wife has 2 daughters, And one of her daughters lives on the Oregon coast and we have grandkids up there. So we wanted to be closer to them so it wasn't a 16-hour trip to go visit them. So I looked for a job doing Ruby, running a Ruby shop, found one. And that's all it took. So I went to work up for a company called G5 and I moved to Bend, Oregon. I figured small company, 7 members on the executive team. We're going to have less dysfunction and more ability to get things done than dealing with the hundreds of people involved with the bureaucracy or thousands of people in the bureaucracy at AT&T. Lesson learned, you can be just as dysfunctional with 5 or 7 people as you can with hundreds. So 2011. 2011, we did more conferences. More conferences started showing up. The list of conferences that you see up here are events we actually went to and recorded. It's by no means a list of all the conferences that were going on in the Ruby community. Because there are a lot of events that happen every year that we don't record. And if you go to our site, we actually do a lot of work now to aggregate videos from other conferences and not just stuff that we produce. So 2011, Mike came to me and said, hey, love the way the high definition stuff worked out last year, let's live stream. So we started live streaming. Also in 2011, after moving up to Bend, Oregon is a community of about 85,000 people. So I now have a small development shop working for G5 in Bend. I want to hire Ruby talent. How do I get people to come to work for me? So we decided that the Bend area is known for a couple of things. One, there's several ski resorts, and 2, we have 12 microbreweries with a population of 85,000 people. So the community is known for good beer. So we decided that we wanted to do a Ruby conference, and in this case, the focus was a little different. So we started Ruby on Rails, and the focus for Ruby on Rails wasn't so much about getting all the local developers to learn about Ruby, because quite frankly, there weren't any, or those the local developers, we knew them. It's a small community. We pretty much knew everybody that was writing code. What we wanted to do was put our city on the map in the Ruby community, so that when we talked to people we were trying to hire, trying to get people to work with us, that they would know where we were at. And having a conference did that. That was the primary reason that we started Ruby on Rails in 2011. 2012. So 2010 and 11, I was basically running Confreak solo. That got a bit arduous and a bit time stretching because I still had a day job as well. So in 2012, I had my first full-time person come on that I trained, and she now actually goes out and records conferences solo. And I've got a second person that'll start recording conferences solo in 2014. Mike didn't have actually any technology changes for me in 2012. So adding staff and getting our response times. One thing that some of the community experienced in 2010 and a bit in 11 was I'd go record a conference, and then it would take 6, 8, and in some cases 12 weeks before you saw the videos. Adding the staff has fixed that. We recorded Rubyconf this year in November 8th through the 10th, and all of the videos were online by December 4th or 5th, I believe. And that was, that's 60 some odd videos. 2013, now that I had full-time staff and other people working on it and wasn't buried with doing all the video production, post-production work myself, we expanded. So we actually recorded looks like I missed one. We recorded 23 events in 2013. Got out of the country again and recorded RCamp in Ghent, Belgium in 2013. The exciting thing is, I've now been doing the conferences and recording them, producing them for 6 years. And in 2013, we saw a ton of new regional conferences occur in the community. Burlington Ruby, which is probably actually, it wasn't their first year. They've been doing it for a couple of years. But Burlington, Vermont is a city of about 45,000 people. Burlington holds a lot of statistical records for things, like they have the biggest, shortest building in the country. things of that nature where, they have the tallest building in the state of Vermont is the shortest building of all of the other states that have tall buildings. So Vermont's a very small community, and Burlington is the capital of Vermont and the largest city, and it has a population base of 45,000. So it's fun to see even small communities out in the middle of, I won't say out in the middle of nowhere, but smaller communities can do this too. Conferences are something that can be done and can be done by a group of committed people. One of the other things that we did in 2013 is, in addition to Ruby on Rails, which is our Ruby conference, also in 2012, I left G5 and went back to work for the Death Star at AT&T. Only now I'm working at AT&T Corporate, and we build cloud computing stuff, and that's where the Openstack influence comes in. But the Openstack community is it's different than the Ruby community, because if you look in the Ruby community, if you look at our list of sponsors, our sponsors are generally small to medium-sized companies that are working on creating products and creating themselves and building a marketplace and making things happen with technology. In the OpenStack community, the sponsors are folks like AT&T, IBM, Cisco, Hewlett-Packard. They're huge corporations who are involved with being able to build and utilize cloud platforms. And OpenStack itself is a project that came out of a joint effort between NASA, which is the National Aeronautics and Space Association in the United States, and another company that built OpenStack together, and then they released it. I wanted to bring this feel of community to OpenStack, so we started OpenStack on Rails. And the small text there is, we had 35 attendees. It's a new concept, but even with 35 people at the conference, and I think that's about what you had at Rubyconf in 2001, isn't it, Chad? 34 people at Rubyconf 2001. So we're spreading the idea of small, intimate gatherings and meetups and conferences. So that was 2013. 2014, this is where we stand now. The first event we're recording this year is Garden City Rubyconf. Thank you for having us. The conferences that are listed there are ones that we are relatively confident we will be recording and or producing this year. So with that, I've got like 3 or 4 minutes left. I want to get real quick. Open source in the enterprise. I work for AT&T today, and I've been there for about 2 years in my previous stint. So we're doing things, we're using OpenStack, we're using Python, we're using Ruby. I just have a couple of points I want to sum up here. The important thing is, if you work for large companies that are starting to utilize open source, one of the things is, at least within AT&T, which is where most of my experience with this is, they want to know who's the vendor that's going to be responsible for this. If we use Rails, who are we going to call when there's a problem? My solution to that was we hired core developers. So part of my pitch that I've done within AT&T for using open source software is we may not get a vendor, but the problem is as a company, even if we're your biggest purchaser, we can't dictate how you respond to the problems that we have. We can put pressure on you, and we can put pressure on vendors to do things, but we can't control it as concisely. With open source, if I have an issue on Rails, if we have an issue in any of our applications with Active Record or whatever, I can get a person who is a core contributor to Active Record to fix the problem. Because we've been able to convince management that, okay, we don't have a vendor, so we need to put money into open source. We need to hire people, and we need to pay them to work on open source full-time. You're not going to be able to do this with smaller companies, because it just doesn't work out. But with larger companies where you'd normally be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a year with an organization to support you otherwise, you can make the argument to spend the money on staff. And we've done that. And so Aaron Patterson works for me at AT&T. So if I have an Active Record issue, I've got the Active Record guy that I can have him fix it. Now, luckily, I don't have to do that very often because it's a pretty solid platform. So in if you're in bigger companies and they're utilizing open source, don't be afraid to make that argument, that instead of paying for support to a vendor, we should be investing in our own people to make the product better. And we go through that with Openstack as well as Ruby and Python. Okay, open source and you. One of the reasons I started Confreaks back when I did is I'm what I call a glue coder. I take disparate systems, I put them together, I write code that gets them to talk to each other and make things work. And that's what I do. And that creates a lot of code that generally needs better tests, a lot of code that doesn't have any tests at all, or a lot of code that runs inefficiently, because I don't have the patience to optimize code. So as I got involved with Ruby, I looked at Confreaks, I looked at what was available, and I said, one of the ways that I can give back to the community is by taking this non-obvious route of creating these videos and making this content available to help build the community. And that's the way I'm going to give back, because that's what I'm good at, is organization and community and people. I'm not as good at code, but I love what we create here. So that's where I focus. So as you think about what you're doing with open source, think about how you can contribute and what you can do that takes advantage of your unique skill set. Not about making that next project that everybody's going to use, because there's so many supporting roles that need to be done. So keep that in mind as you're looking at it. And then the next section real quick, I'm going to go through it a little bit quicker, is just a couple things to think about in both your professional and personal lives. So my first question for you to ponder is, why are you doing what you're doing today? And when I wrote that, I was looking not so much as ask you, why are you at this conference, as I was, why are you doing what you spend 40 plus hours a week on? Understand why you're doing that. What are you trying to accomplish by doing it? So, like I said, I've got 6 kids, so one of the reasons I work every day and do what it is I do is to generate the money to give me a certain lifestyle and to allow my kids to have a certain lifestyle and to be able to go to college and to be able to learn and do things. That's one of the reasons I do what it is I do. Okay, is what you're doing today what you would be doing if you knew you could not fail? What's that? Yes. That's a good answer. So if you knew you couldn't fail at what you were going to be doing, would you do something differently than what you're doing today? And it's okay if what you're doing facilitates your passions. Meaning sometimes you work a job that is not the thing that you care the most about, but it gives you the resources and the liberty to pursue the things that you care about. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's crucial, but it also makes it so that you can care more about your day job or that thing that you're doing that's not your passion. You can care a whole lot more about it and be a whole lot more excited about it if you understand why you're doing it and that you're doing that to drive something else in your life. It makes it much less monotonous or much less tedious if you know that because I do X, I'm able to do Y. So the last slide, you owe it to yourself to understand why you're doing it and what you expect out of it. Yeah, another, just see where my slide is, I'm almost done. Yep, lost that thought. Okay, last quote. This is one of my favorite quotes. It says, in the information age, the barriers just aren't there. The barriers are self-imposed. If you want to set off and go develop some grand new thing, you don't need millions of dollars of capitalization. You need enough pizza and Diet Coke to stick in your refrigerator, a cheap PC to work on, and a dedication to go through with it. This is a quote from John Carmack, who is one of the founders of id, created many of the first-person shooter games and the graphic engines that were behind them. The key to this, though, in my opinion, is not the, I can't see my capitalization. Anyway, the key to it is this, and the dedication to go through with it. So the effort that it takes to put on a conference, the effort it takes to attend, not even organize, but to attend a meetup, is just the dedication to go through with it, the commitment to say, hey, I'm going to take one evening a month or one evening every other month and go to this meetup and participate and work on building my own skills. It's all about the dedication to go through with it. And with that, thank you.